The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet streets of Portland when Marcus opened his tired eyes. At 52 years old, he had been living on these streets for the past 3 years. His old blue backpack, worn and patched in several places, held everything he owned in this world. A few pieces of clothing, an old water bottle, and a small photo of his family from happier times. Every morning, Marcus followed the same routine. He would carefully fold his thin blanket and store it in his backpack, making sure to keep it dry for the next night. The concrete bench in Central Park had been his bed for the past 6 months. It wasn't comfortable, but it was under a large oak tree that kept him dry when it rained. That morning, like every other morning, Marcus walked slowly to the nearby shelter. The kind volunteers there knew him well. They'd always greeted him with warm smiles and sometimes even saved an extra portion of breakfast for him. Today, they were serving hot oatmeal with apples and some toast. Marcus politely asked for 2 servings, something he did every day. The new volunteer looked confused, but Mary, who had worked there for years, just smiled and nodded. "The usual Marcus?" she asked, already reaching for an extra container. She knew exactly why he needed the extra food, and it wasn't for himself. Marcus walked 3 blocks to a quiet alley behind an old bookstore. As he turned the corner, he heard the familiar sound of paws scratching against concrete. There she was, a golden retriever mix with patches of missing fur and sad eyes. Marcus had named her Hope the first time he saw her, 2 months ago. She had been digging through a garbage can, looking as hungry and lonely as he felt. "Good morning, Hope," Marcus said softly, sitting down on the ground. The dog wagged her tail slowly, keeping a safe distance at first. She was still nervous around people, but she trusted Marcus more than anyone else. He noticed she was limping slightly more than usual today. Marcus opened the container of oatmeal and placed it carefully on the ground. "Come on, girl. Breakfast time," he called gently. Hope approached slowly, her nose twitching at the smell of warm food. As she ate, Marcus noticed how her ribs showed through her dirty fur. She needed a bath and probably medicine for her leg, but he could barely take care of himself. While Hope ate, Marcus thought about his own life. 3 years ago, he had a normal life. A job as a construction worker, a small apartment, and a family. Then the accident happened. Medical bills piled up, he couldn't work with his injured back, and everything fell apart piece by piece. His wife took their daughter and moved to another state. He ended up on the streets, another invisible face in the city. But finding Hope had given him a new purpose. Every day, he made sure she had food, even if it meant he would go hungry sometimes. He saved the better portions for her, cleaned her wounds when he could, and talked to her about his day. She listened without judgment, her brown eyes full of understanding. After finishing her meal, Hope moved closer to Marcus. She lay down next to him, allowing him to gently pat her head. This was his favorite part of the day. For these few precious moments, neither of them was alone. They were just 2 friends sharing a quiet morning together. As people started filling the streets on their way to work, some walked past without a glance. Others stared, a few even pointed. But Marcus didn't mind anymore. He had learned that sometimes the greatest kindness comes from those who have the least to give. And even though he had lost everything else, he had found a friend in this lonely dog who needed him as much as he needed her. As days turned into weeks, Marcus and Hope's morning meetings became the talk of their small corner of Portland. The nervous dog that once kept her distance now spent more and more time with the homeless man who had shown her nothing but kindness. Their friendship grew stronger with each passing day, changing both their lives in unexpected ways. One rainy Tuesday morning, Marcus woke up to find Hope already waiting under his bench. She was soaking wet and shivering. Without thinking twice, he took off his only dry jacket and wrapped it around her. "You need this more than me, girl," he said softly, his voice full of concern. The dog's grateful eyes met his, and she moved closer, seeking warmth. That morning marked a change in their relationship. Instead of just visiting for food, Hope started staying with Marcus throughout the day. She would lay quietly beside him as he sat on his usual spot near the park entrance. Her presence made people see him differently. Children would point and smile, sometimes asking their parents if they could pet the nice dog with the kind man. Marcus noticed that Hope had her own routine too. Every morning at exactly 7:30, she would patrol around his bench, as if checking that the area was safe. She barked at anyone who came too close while Marcus was sleeping, becoming his loyal protector. When he collected bottles and cans to earn some money, she walked beside him, carrying small bottles in her mouth to help. On particularly cold nights, Hope would curl up next to Marcus on his bench, sharing her body warmth. Her fur might have been patchy, and she might have been limping, but to Marcus, she was the most beautiful dog in the world. He started saving bits of his lunch to give her proper dog food instead of just shelter leftovers. Sometimes he would go hungry, but seeing Hope's tail wag made it all worth it. People who regularly passed by their spot began to notice the special bond between them. Tom, the hot dog vendor who worked nearby, often saved his unsold hot dogs for them at the end of the day. "You two make quite a team," he would say, smiling as Hope gently took the offered food from his hand. She had learned to trust a few other people because of Marcus's influence. One afternoon, a group of teenage boys started throwing rocks near them, trying to scare Hope away. Marcus, usually quiet and withdrawn, stood up and firmly told them to stop. Hope stood beside him, her usual timidity replaced with protective loyalty. The boys, surprised by their united front, quickly left. That day, Marcus realized that Hope had given him something he had lost long ago, the courage to stand up for himself. As weeks passed, Hope's physical appearance began to improve. The regular meals and Marcus's care helped her fur grow back in patches. She still limped, but it seemed less noticeable when she was running to greet Marcus each morning. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now sparkled with joy whenever she saw him. Marcus spent his evenings talking to Hope about his dreams. He told her about his hope of finding a job again, of having a small room where they could both stay warm and dry. Hope would listen attentively, her head tilted to one side, as if she understood every word. Sometimes she would place her paw on his hand, as if to say, "Everything will be okay." Their unlikely friendship had become a source of strength for both of them. In Hope, Marcus found a reason to keep going, to stay sober, to try harder. And in Marcus, Hope found the one thing she needed most: someone who cared about her unconditionally. Together, they were no longer just a homeless man and a stray dog. They were family. Word about Marcus and Hope's special friendship began to spread through the neighborhood like a gentle wave. The local shop owners, who had once viewed Marcus as just another homeless person to shoo away from their storefronts, started seeing him in a completely different light. Lisa, who owned the Sweet Bean coffee shop on the corner, was the first to break the invisible barrier. One chilly morning, she watched through her cafe window as Marcus shared his small piece of bread with Hope. The dog waited patiently as Marcus broke the bread into small pieces, making sure she got the bigger portion. This simple act of kindness touched Lisa's heart deeply. The next morning, Lisa walked out of her shop carrying 2 paper bags. "Good morning," she said, approaching them carefully so as not to startle Hope. "I have some day-old pastries that we can't sell. Would you and your friend like them?" Marcus looked up, surprised by the kind gesture. Hope's tail wagged slowly, sensing the friendly tone in Lisa's voice. That simple interaction started a chain reaction in the community. Mr. Chen from the grocery store began leaving a bowl of water outside his shop for Hope. Mrs. Rodriguez, who ran the small Mexican restaurant down the street, would save leftover meat from her kitchen for them. Even Mr. Thompson, the grumpy hardware store owner who usually complained about homeless people, started nodding hello when he passed by. One day, a group of school children on their way to Portland Elementary stopped to pet Hope. Their teacher, Ms. Brown, used the moment to teach them about compassion. "See how Marcus takes care of Hope," she explained to her students. "He doesn't have much, but he shares everything he has. That's what true kindness looks like." The children started bringing extra snacks from their lunchboxes. 8-year-old Tommy shared his favorite peanut butter sandwich. Sarah, a shy 6th grader, brought her old dog blanket from home. Each small gift was offered with pure hearts, and Marcus accepted them with grateful tears in his eyes. Local news started spreading on social media. Someone posted a photo of Marcus and Hope sharing a sandwich, with a caption that read, "This homeless man feeds his dog before himself every day. True love has no boundaries." The post got hundreds of likes and shares from Portland residents. The attention made Marcus uncomfortable at first. He wasn't used to people noticing him, let alone praising him, but Hope seemed to enjoy their new friends. She would wag her tail at familiar faces and had even learned to shake hands with some of the regular passersby. One afternoon, a woman named Carol from the local animal shelter stopped by. She had heard about Hope's limp and offered to provide free basic veterinary care. "The community wants to help," she explained to Marcus. "You've been taking such good care of her. Now let us help you both." The change in how people treated them was remarkable. Those who had previously crossed the street to avoid Marcus now stopped to chat. They asked about Hope's health, shared stories about their own pets, and treated Marcus with dignity and respect. Some even started calling their corner Hope's Corner. Marcus remained humble through all the attention. He didn't see himself as special. He was just a man who had found a friend when he needed one most. But to the community, he had become a symbol of something important, a reminder that kindness exists in the most unexpected places, and that love can flourish even in the hardest circumstances. As autumn leaves began to fall around their bench, Marcus and Hope were no longer invisible. They had become an important part of the neighborhood's daily life, proving that sometimes it takes a homeless man and a stray dog to help a community rediscover its heart. Winter arrived in Portland with an unexpected fury. The temperature dropped lower than it had in years, and heavy snow began falling in thick, white sheets. For Marcus and Hope, this wasn't just bad weather, it was a fight for survival. Marcus woke up one morning to find his bench covered in snow. His fingers felt numb, and his old blanket provided little protection against the freezing wind. But his first thought wasn't about himself, it was about Hope. He found her curled up under the nearby bush where she usually slept, shivering badly. "Come here, girl," Marcus called softly, his breath visible in the cold air. Hope limped toward him, her paws red from the frozen ground. Without hesitation, Marcus took off his only blanket and wrapped it carefully around her. "You need this more than me," he whispered, rubbing her ears gently to warm them up. The regular visitors to Hope's Corner noticed their struggle. Lisa from the coffee shop tried to convince Marcus to go to a shelter, but most shelters didn't allow dogs. "I won't leave her," Marcus said firmly, even as his teeth chattered from the cold. "She's all I have." Hope pressed closer to him, as if understanding his words. Mr. Chen from the grocery store started leaving his back door slightly open at night, hoping Marcus and Hope would use it for shelter. But Marcus was too proud to enter without permission, choosing instead to huddle with Hope in the alley behind the store, using cardboard boxes as walls against the wind. One particularly cold night, Marcus noticed Hope's cough for the first time. It was a deep, worrying sound that made his heart sink. She wasn't eating well either, and her nose was warm when he touched it. During the day, she would lie listlessly beside him, her usual playful energy gone. Marcus tried everything he could think of to help her. He used his own body to shield her from the wind. He saved up the little money he got from collecting cans to buy her some cheap cough medicine from the dollar store. But nothing seemed to help. Hope's cough got worse, and she became weaker each day. The winter storms kept coming, one after another. Ice formed on the streets, making it dangerous for both of them to walk. Marcus slipped once while trying to get to the shelter for food, scraping his hands badly on the frozen ground. But he was more worried about Hope falling with her bad leg. Some nights, when the temperature dropped below freezing, Marcus would stay awake all night, holding Hope close to share what little body warmth he had. He told her stories to distract them both from the cold, stories about spring coming, about warm sunny days, about a future where they would both have a proper home. Mrs. Rodriguez from the Mexican restaurant noticed Hope's worsening condition. She tried to help by bringing warm soup and even an old dog coat she had kept from her own pet who had passed away. But even with these kind gestures, Hope's health continued to decline. Marcus felt helpless watching his best friend suffer. He had survived many winters on the streets, but this was different. Every time Hope coughed, he felt a pain in his chest. Every time she refused to eat, his own appetite disappeared. He would gladly have given up his own health to make her better, but he didn't know how. One morning, after a particularly rough night, Marcus made a decision. His pride wasn't worth Hope's life. He needed to find help, real help, before it was too late. As he watched Hope sleeping fitfully, her breathing labored and her body trembling despite the blanket, he knew he had to do something soon. The question was, what could a homeless man do to save his dying dog? The veterinary clinics in the area were expensive, and he had no money. But as he sat there, stroking Hope's head and listening to her troubled breathing, Marcus promised her he would find a way. He had to, because losing Hope wasn't an option he could bear to consider. Dr. Sarah Chen had been watching Marcus and Hope for weeks from her apartment window above the grocery store. As a veterinarian at Portland Animal Clinic, she had treated many sick animals, But something about this pair touched her heart deeply. Every morning, she saw Marcus checking Hope's breathing, trying to warm her paws, and sharing his meager food with her. That morning was different. Dr. Chen watched as Hope struggled to stand up, her cough worse than ever. The dog's usual morning patrol around Marcus's bench had become just a few shaky steps. Making a quick decision, she put on her warm coat and headed downstairs. "Excuse me," she said softly, approaching Marcus. Hope raised her head weakly but didn't bark, which worried Dr. Chen even more. "I'm Sarah Chen, a veterinarian. I've been watching you both, and I'm concerned about your dog's health. Would you let me take a look at her?" Marcus held Hope closer, protective and uncertain. I can't pay for medical care," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been trying to save money, but..." He looked down at the few coins in his cup, the result of yesterday's bottle collecting. Dr. Chen knelt down beside them, snow soaking through her jeans. "No charge," she said firmly. "My clinic is just 3 blocks away. We can help her there." She noticed how Marcus's hands trembled, not just from cold, but from fear of trusting a stranger with his best friend. Hope's next coughing fit made the decision easier. It was a deep, rattling sound that made both humans wince. "She needs help," Dr. Chen said gently. "Please, let me try." She held out her hand, letting Hope sniff it. The dog's nose was hot and dry, another bad sign. After what seemed like hours but was probably just minutes, Marcus nodded slowly. "Can I come with her?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Chen smiled warmly. "Of course, she'll feel safer with you there." The walk to the clinic was slow and careful. Hope could barely walk, so Marcus carried her, refusing Dr. Chen's offer to help despite his own exhaustion. When they reached the Portland Animal Clinic, the warmth inside made Marcus realize just how cold he had been. The examination room was bright and clean. Marcus stood nervously in the corner as Dr. Chen checked Hope thoroughly. She listened to the dog's chest, took her temperature, and examined her legs and paws. Her face grew more serious with each test. "She has a severe case of pneumonia," Dr. Chen explained, using simple words. "The cold weather made it worse. Her old leg injury never healed properly either." She stroked Hope's head gently. "But we can help her. She needs antibiotics, proper food, and a warm place to recover." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I can't keep her warm enough out there," he said, looking at his feet. Maybe someone else should take her. Someone who can give her a proper home." The words clearly broke his heart to say. Dr. Chen watched as Hope, despite her weakness, tried to move closer to Marcus. The bond between them was obvious. "That's not the answer," she said firmly. "You've kept her alive all this time. Now let me help you both." She made a decision that would change all their lives. "I have a storage room in the back of the clinic. It's warm and private. You and Hope can stay there while she recovers." When Marcus started to protest, she held up her hand. "I need someone to watch her overnight anyway. You'll be helping me." Marcus stood speechless, one hand still resting on Hope's fur. For the first time in weeks, the dog's tail wagged slightly. Dr. Chen smiled, knowing she had made the right choice. "Let's get her started on medication, and then I'll show you where you can sleep." As Dr. Chen prepared Hope's treatment, she watched Marcus gently talking to the dog, promising her everything would be okay. In all of her years as a veterinarian, she had never seen such a pure connection between human and animal. Sometimes, she realized, healing one meant healing both. The next morning at Portland Animal Clinic, Dr. Chen arrived early to check on her special patients. She found Marcus sleeping in a chair next to Hope's bed, his hand resting gently on her fur. The storage room had been transformed into a cozy space with blankets and a small heater. Hope's breathing already sounded better after just one night of proper care. While Marcus went to get some breakfast from the clinic's break room, Dr. Chen decided to do a complete checkup on Hope. As she ran a routine scan for a microchip, something she hadn't been able to do the day before, her scanner suddenly beeped. Dr. Chen's eyes widened in surprise. "It can't be," she whispered, scanning again. The machine beeped once more, displaying a number. Hope had a microchip. Somewhere out there, she had a family who had registered her. Dr. Chen's hands shook slightly as she sat down at her computer to look up the chip number in the national database. When Marcus returned with a cup of coffee, he noticed Dr. Chen's serious expression. "Is something wrong? Is Hope getting worse?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. Dr. Chen took a deep breath, knowing her next words would change everything. Marcus, I found something during Hope's examination, she said gently. She has a microchip. She watched as confusion crossed his face. It means she belonged to a family before she became lost. I found their information in the database. Marcus sat down heavily in the nearest chair, his coffee forgotten. A family, he repeated, his voice barely audible. Hope, sensing his distress, tried to lift her head to look at him. How long ago? Dr. Chen checked her computer screen. The microchip was registered to the Thompson family. They live in Cedar Hills, just outside Portland. According to the records, Hope, their Luna, went missing about 14 months ago. They've been searching for her all this time. Tears began to roll down Marcus's cheeks as he looked at Hope. Luna, he whispered. The dog's ears perked up slightly at her old name, even after all this time. She has a real home, doesn't she? A warm place where she belongs. Dr. Chen watched as Marcus struggled with the news. I have to call them, she said softly. They've been looking for her for so long. But Marcus, you should know what you did for her, keeping her alive all these months. That's incredible. Marcus nodded slowly, still looking at Hope. Can I stay until they come? I want to make sure she's okay with them, that she remembers them. His voice broke on the last words. Dr. Chen made the call. On the other end, Mrs. Thompson burst into tears at the news that Luna had been found. They would come right away, she said, still crying. They had never given up hope of finding their beloved dog. The next hour was the longest of Marcus's life. He sat with Hope, telling her everything would be okay, though his heart was breaking. He told her about her real family, promising her she would be warm and safe. Hope just looked at him with those loving eyes, not understanding that everything was about to change. When a car pulled up outside the clinic, Hope's ears perked up at the sound of familiar voices. A moment later, a family burst through the door, a couple in their 40s and 2 teenage children. They stopped short at the sight of their long-lost dog. Luna? Mrs. Thompson called softly, her voice trembling. Hope's tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster. She remembered. Even after more than a year, she remembered her family. Marcus stood quietly in the corner, watching as Hope's past and present collided. Dr. Chen stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. They both knew this was the right thing, but that didn't make it any easier. Sometimes, doing the right thing meant having to break your own heart in the process. The reunion at Portland Animal Clinic was filled with tears and mixed emotions. The Thompson family couldn't stop hugging Hope, or Luna, as they called her, while Marcus watched from the corner, trying to keep his own tears quiet. Dr. Chen stood nearby, her heart aching for everyone involved. Mrs. Thompson was the first to notice Marcus's pain. She walked over to him, wiping her eyes. You're the one who's been taking care of her? She asked softly. Marcus could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. How long? 6 months, he managed to say. Found her digging in trash behind the bookstore. She was scared and hungry. He paused, watching as Hope played with the Thompson children, her tail wagging despite her illness. I just couldn't leave her alone. Mr. Thompson approached them, his face serious. Dr. Chen told us everything, he said. How you shared your food with her. Used your only blanket to keep her warm. He put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. You saved our dog's life. The teenage daughter, Emily, called out excitedly, Look, Dad. Luna remembers all of her old tricks. They watched as Hope sat, rolled over, and offered her paw, just as she had been taught years ago. But then, to everyone's surprise, she looked back at Marcus, as if seeking his approval too. That small gesture broke something in Marcus. He turned away, trying to hide his face, but Mrs. Thompson had already seen. You love her too, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Chen brought everyone coffee and suggested they sit down to talk. She explained Hope's pneumonia and the treatment she needed. The Thompsons immediately offered to cover all medical expenses, including what had already been done. It's the least we can do, Mr. Thompson insisted. As they talked, Hope moved between her old family and Marcus, unable to choose, sensing the emotion in the room. She finally settled halfway between them, her head resting on her paws, watching them all with worried eyes. She's not the same dog who ran away, Emily observed thoughtfully. She's calmer now, gentler. She looked at Marcus. You changed her, made her trust people again. Her brother Tommy added, remember how scared she used to be during thunderstorms? But look how brave she is now. He patted Hope's head proudly. She had to be brave to survive on the streets. Marcus listened to their stories about Hope's puppyhood, about how she used to chase squirrels in their backyard, how she would steal socks from the laundry basket. Each story felt like a small knife in his heart, but he forced himself to smile. This was her real family. They could give her everything he couldn't. Finally, it was time. The Thompsons had brought a car with warm blankets for Hope's ride home. As they prepared to leave, Marcus knelt beside his friend one last time. Be good, girl, he whispered, his voice breaking. You're going home now. Real home. Hope licked his face, her tail wagging slowly. She seemed confused about why Marcus wasn't coming with them. When Mrs. Thompson gently led her toward the door, she resisted, looking back at Marcus with questioning eyes. It's okay, Marcus told her, though his heart was shattering. Go on. They love you. He forced himself to stay strong, to keep smiling, even as Hope disappeared through the clinic door. Dr. Chen watched as Marcus stood at the window, his shoulders shaking silently as the Thompsons' car drove away. She wanted to comfort him but knew no words could help right now. Sometimes love meant letting go, even when every part of you wanted to hold on. Just before they left, Mrs. Thompson had pressed a piece of paper into Marcus's hand with their address and phone number. You'll always be part of her family too, she had said. But standing there in the suddenly quiet clinic, Marcus had never felt more alone. The empty space beside him, where Hope had been for the past 6 months, felt vast and cold, like a winter that would never end. 3 days after Hope left with the Thompsons, Marcus still sat on his usual bench, feeling more alone than ever. The neighborhood wasn't the same without her. Even the regular visitors to Hope's Corner noticed the difference. The space felt empty without the friendly dog's presence. That morning, a familiar car pulled up near the bench. Marcus's heart jumped when he saw Mr. Thompson stepping out. Good morning, Marcus, he said, walking over. Would you like to come see Luna? She's been looking for you. Marcus hesitated, but Mr. Thompson insisted. She's not eating well, he explained. The kids think she misses you. During the drive to Cedar Hills, Mr. Thompson talked about his landscaping business. Actually, that's another reason I came. We need help at the nursery. Someone who knows about hard work and cares about doing things right. The Thompson house was small but welcoming, with a large fenced backyard full of flowers. Before they even reached the front door, they heard excited barking. Hope came bounding out, moving faster than she had in weeks, her pneumonia clearly improving with proper medical care. She jumped up on Marcus, tail wagging wildly, covering his face with kisses. Mrs. Thompson appeared at the door, smiling. She's been watching the window all morning, she said. It's like she knew you were coming. As Marcus played with Hope in the backyard, Mr. Thompson showed him around their small plant nursery next door. We have a guest house behind the nursery, he mentioned casually. It needs some fixing up, but it could be a good home for someone willing to work hard. Marcus stopped throwing Hope's ball, looking at Mr. Thompson in surprise. Are you offering me a job? And a place to stay? Hope nudged his hand with her nose, impatient for him to throw the ball again. We are, Mrs. Thompson said, joining them. You took care of Luna when she had no one. Now let us help you. She paused, watching as Hope brought the ball back to Marcus. Besides, I think someone would be very happy to have you close by. Tears filled Marcus's eyes as he looked around, at the peaceful nursery, at the small but sturdy guest house, at Hope's happy face. I don't know what to say, he whispered. This is too much. Say yes, Emily called from where she and Tommy were setting up a lunch table in the garden. Luna needs both her families. Hope barked, as if agreeing with the teenager's words. That afternoon, as they all sat around the garden table sharing sandwiches, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope for his own future. Mr. Thompson explained about the job, caring for plants and helping customers. The guest house would need work, but Marcus was good with his hands. He could make it a real home. Dr. Chen, who had been invited for lunch, watched the scene with a smile. Sometimes the best medicine, she said, isn't medicine at all. Sometimes it's just finding the right place to belong. Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked hard to fix up the guest house. The Thompson children helped paint the walls, and Mrs. Thompson found some second-hand furniture. Hope supervised everything, carrying small tools in her mouth and sleeping in the guest house each night as Marcus worked. 1 month later, Marcus stood in his finished home, a simple but comfortable space with a warm bed, a small kitchen, and most importantly, a dog bed in the corner. Hope spent most nights there, only returning to the Thompson house for dinner and family time. "You know what, Curl?" Marcus said one evening as they sat on his new porch watching the sunset. "Sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest times." Hope rested her head on his lap, her eyes full of love and trust. From being homeless and alone, Marcus had found not just a job and a home, but a family. One that had enough love to share with a man and his dog. And Hope, the scared stray who had brought them all together, finally had everything she needed: her original family, her street friend, and enough love to fill both her homes.